In the freezing mud of Hatfield Chase, Penda of Mercia watches his men strip the fallen Northumbrian king of his weapons. Every blade and mail shirt recovered is valuable salvage, material strength stripped from a rival and added to his own limited armory. The historical record remembers Penda as a savage, bloodthirsty heathen. This reputation was authored exclusively by the people he defeated and later codified by their monks. The primary source for this era is the Northumbrian monk Bede. His writings were meticulously crafted theological and political documents designed to frame Penda as a demonic obstacle to a Christian future. To understand Penda's 30-year reign, we have to look past the religious mythology. He operated with a level of calculated, aggressive risk that would be familiar to any modern strategic analyst. We can explain his success by looking at how he managed strategic partnerships, hostile takeovers, and the total control of regional resources. The Anglo-Saxon Heptarchy was a violent, unregulated geopolitical market driven by the cold extraction of wealth. In the early 7th century, Northumbria was a massive, unified bloc dominating northern Britain. Holding a monopoly on power, they used unmatched military capital to push lines of tribute against fractured southern territories. Mercia was a landlocked territory, effectively boxed in by this superpower. A direct military confrontation was impossible. The Mercians lacked the numbers to survive a war of attrition against such a dominant force. Instead, Penda utilized a strategy of asymmetric disruption. He dismantled the monopoly without ever attempting to match its raw size. He relied on two specific tools: securing cross-cultural alliances and executing violent, high-value decapitation strikes. For Mercia, breaking the Northumbrian hold was the only way to ensure the kingdom's continued existence. By 633 AD, Penda recognized that he could not challenge the Northumbrian King Edwin with Mercian forces alone. His solution was to seek external strength. He formed an alliance with the Welsh king, Cadwallon of Winwaed. Penda was a pagan Anglo-Saxon. Cadwallon was a Christian Briton. Their partnership was purely pragmatic, a strategic merger between two leaders who shared a common competitor. This arrangement was secured by the physical exchange of gold and high-status hostages to guarantee that neither side would abandon the other. The combined Mercian and Welsh forces violently collided with the Northumbrian army at the Battle of Hatfield Chase. King Edwin was killed in the fighting. His army was routed, and the unified Northumbrian state immediately fractured into competing factions. Hatfield Chase proved Penda's thesis. Even a dominant power could be broken by leveraging volatile, temporary partnerships. 9 years later, the Northumbrians reorganized under a new aggressive leader, King Oswald. On this map, Oswald mobilized his forces and crossed the border directly into Mercian territory. Oswald's objective was to permanently neutralize Mercia and re-establish the northern monopoly. At the Battle of Maserfield, Penda used a decapitation strike. He bypassed the main Northumbrian front line and targeted the king himself. Reaching the king required breaking through his personal bodyguard. These were heavily armored specialists, trained to die in a dense shield wall before allowing their leader to fall. The Mercian forces broke through. King Oswald was killed in the mud. Penda immediately dismembered Oswald's body, mounting his head and arms on wooden stakes. This wasn't just violence, it was a message. It provided physical proof to every rival kingdom that the Northumbrian leadership had been liquidated. With Oswald's death, the center of gravity in Britain shifted to the Midlands. For the next decade, Penda was the most powerful ruler on the island. Following Maserfield, Penda expanded his reach, driving the King of Wessex into exile and seizing control of the regional resources. To maintain this control, he managed a massive coalition of 30 allied warlords, stretching from East Anglia to Wales. A coalition of this size carried an immense logistical cost. These 30 commanders demanded continuous payouts, which forced Penda to seek larger and more lucrative targets. This pressure drove the army deep into the north to corner Oswald's successor, King Oswiu. Penda laid siege to the great northern strongholds. He forced the Northumbrians behind their stone fortifications and squeezed their remaining assets. The strategy worked. Oswiu surrendered the royal treasury, granting Penda the largest wealth extraction of his career. This represented his peak of influence, but it also left him strategically overextended. Penda was now deep in hostile territory, with an impossibly large payroll and dangerously thin supply lines. In 655 AD, the Mercian army began the long withdrawal south, moving a massive force through freezing rain and deep mud. Feeding 30 distinct warbands in hostile territory during mid-November is almost impossible. The incentives for his allies had shifted. With the treasure already secured and distributed, the warlords had no reason to risk a rearguard action. The coalition began to dissolve. Key partners realized they were trapped between a pursuing enemy and a flooded landscape. Under the cover of night, these allied commanders simply slipped away with their own troops, entirely abandoning the main column. The moment the logistical burden outweighed the promise of further profit, Penda's entire power structure collapsed. At the river Winwaed, the retreating Mercians were trapped against the banks. A swollen river created an impassable barrier south, while Northumbrians closed in. Pushing forward, Northumbrian units forced the fractured Mercian lines backward into the lethal water. The heavy iron armor that protected these men in a shield wall now became a weight that dragged them down. The desperate retreat quickly turned into a complete disaster, as men in full battle kit were swept away by the freezing current. Far more Mercian troops drowned in the flood than were actually killed by Northumbrian swords. Penda was killed, and the remaining leaders of his coalition were lost in the river trap. The monk Bede recorded this as a divine miracle. The reality was a mechanical failure of geography and supply. Penda was a brilliant strategist who successfully disrupted a dominant monopoly for 3 decades, but he was ultimately defeated by the unforgiving requirements of moving a massive army through a winter landscape.